The stars had belonged to the Vorthan Empire for nearly 3,000 years. At least, that was what every citizen of the empire had been taught. From the icy colonies orbiting distant blue giants to the glittering palace worlds surrounding the imperial core, the Vorthans believed their rule was not simply political, it was natural law. Their fleets were unmatched. Their armies were feared. Their king was worshipped. And every species unfortunate enough to stand in their path eventually learned the same lesson. Resistance was temporary. Submission was inevitable. For centuries, the empire expanded without interruption. World after world bent the knee. Civilizations older than mountains surrendered their sovereignty. Warrior races that had once terrified entire sectors became obedient subjects beneath the imperial banner. The Vorthans called it order. Others called it conquest. Either way, no one could stop it. Then humanity arrived. At first, nobody paid much attention. Earth sat near the outer regions of explored space. Its people possessed no ancient empire. No legendary fleets. No genetic superiority. No natural weapons. To the Vorthans, humans appeared fragile. Their skin lacked armor. Their claws were non-existent. Their lifespans were short compared to most galactic species. Even their history seemed primitive. They fought among themselves. They made mistakes. They disagreed constantly. The imperial scholars laughed when they studied humanity's records. These creatures nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times. They are emotional, impulsive, undisciplined, unfit for galactic leadership. The reports eventually reached the throne world of Kalar Prime. There, seated upon a black crystal throne overlooking an ocean of lights, King Varric the Eternal reviewed humanity's profile. The aging monarch studied the information in silence. Then he laughed. A deep, thunderous sound echoed through the chamber. Around him, ministers joined in. Military commanders smirked. Even royal advisors struggled to contain their amusement. These are the beings causing concern? Varric asked. One advisor bowed. Some neighboring systems have formed trade agreements with them, Your Majesty. Trade agreements? The king replied. With primitives? The chamber erupted with laughter again. Varric tossed the report aside. They will learn their place. Months later, imperial diplomats arrived in Earth's solar system. Their message was simple. Submit. Pay tribute. Accept Vorthan authority. And in exchange, humanity would be permitted to exist. The transmission reached every government on Earth simultaneously. Billions watched. The galaxy watched too. Many expected humanity to surrender. Most species did. History suggested resistance only delayed defeat. Yet the human response surprised everyone. Earth did not answer immediately. No angry threats. No desperate negotiations. No panic declarations. For 3 days, silence filled the communication channels. Then a single message arrived. Short, respectful, and unwavering. Humanity declines. That was all. No insults. No grand speeches. No fear. Just refusal. The message reached King Varric during a royal celebration. The king read it twice. Then a third time. The room gradually became quiet. Declines? He asked. The messenger nodded nervously. That is their entire response. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Varric smiled. Not amused. Not entertained. Angry. They misunderstand the situation. The celebration ended immediately. Within days, the largest military mobilization in a century began. Across imperial territory, shipyards ignited with activity. Battleships departed orbital docks. Carrier groups assembled. Legions prepared for deployment. Humanity had rejected the Empire. Now the Empire intended to make an example of humanity. Throughout the galaxy, reactions were mixed. Some admired Earth's courage. Most considered it suicide. After all, no species had successfully resisted the Vorthans before. Not for long. Certainly not alone. Yet Earth continued preparing. Factories operated around the clock. Scientists worked without rest. Civilian volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Entire nations coordinated resources. Political rivals who had argued for decades suddenly cooperated. Not because they believed victory was guaranteed. Because surrender was unacceptable. That difference confused nearly every alien observer. The Vorthans fought because they expected to win. Humans fought because they believed some things mattered more than victory. The distinction would change galactic history. Far beyond Earth's orbit, the first Imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace. Thousands of warships filled the darkness. The sight was overwhelming. Even experienced military analysts struggled to comprehend the scale. Entire moons disappeared behind formations of steel. Energy signatures illuminated surrounding space like artificial suns. At the center traveled the king's flagship, the Dominion. A vessel so enormous that smaller ships docked inside it like insects entering a cave. King Varek intended to witness humanity's surrender personally. He expected the campaign to last weeks, perhaps months. What he did not know was that the moment his fleet entered human territory, the empire had already begun its decline. Not because humanity possessed stronger weapons. Not because Earth had hidden superweapons. But because the king had made a mistake shared by countless conquerors throughout history. He measured humanity's strength by its appearance. He measured humanity's value by its technology. And he measured humanity's resolve by the standards of his own people. The galaxy would soon discover how wrong those assumptions were. The first battle occurred near the outer colonies. Imperial commanders expected little resistance. Instead, they encountered something unusual. Human defenders did not fight to destroy the invading fleet. They fought to delay it. Every station, every asteroid outpost, every mining settlement. They resisted long enough to evacuate civilians. When defenses became impossible to hold, they withdrew. When withdrawal became impossible, they sacrificed themselves so others could escape. Again and again. The pattern repeated. Imperial victories accumulated rapidly. Yet progress remained frustratingly slow. Human forces refused to behave logically. By every strategic calculation they should have collapsed. Instead they adapted, improvised, endured. And with each passing battle, King Varek became increasingly irritated. Because the humans refused to break. Not physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. The thing he demanded most was the one thing humanity would not surrender. Its resolve. The Vorthan Empire had conquered hundreds of civilizations. Its military academies taught the same principle generation after generation. Every enemy had a breaking point. The challenge was simply finding it. Some species surrendered after losing territory. Others surrendered after losing fleets. A few endured until their capitals fell. But eventually, every civilization accepted reality. Or so the Vorthans believed. Humanity challenged that belief from the very beginning. 3 months into the invasion, Imperial commanders had achieved every objective they had been assigned. Dozens of colonies had fallen. Supply routes had been disrupted. Strategic outposts had been destroyed. By every traditional measure, the campaign was a success. Yet something felt wrong. The humans were losing. Everyone could see that. But they were not acting like a defeated people. Instead of collapsing into panic, they seemed to become more determined with every setback. Entire communities volunteered to support the war effort. Civilian engineers transformed factories overnight. Teachers became logistics coordinators. Scientists worked alongside soldiers. Farmers donated supplies. Doctors traveled to frontline systems. Every loss appeared to strengthen humanity's resolve rather than weaken it. The phenomenon baffled imperial analysts. One report submitted to King Varek described it plainly. Human morale remained stable despite unfavorable battlefield conditions. The king stared at the report. Then he crushed it in his hand. Impossible. Yet it was true. On Earth, cities remained illuminated. Schools remained open. Families continued living their lives. There was fear, certainly. But there was also determination. The invasion had not united humanity through force. It had reminded them what they were fighting for. Freedom. Home. Each other. Things no empire could measure. Things no empire could easily destroy. Far from Earth, on the colony world of Haven's Reach, Captain Elena Torres prepared for what many believed would be a final stand. Haven's Reach was not strategically important. It contained no major military installations, no rare resources, no political significance. Its population consisted mostly of farmers and researchers. The logical decision would have been evacuation. Unfortunately, evacuation was impossible. More than 4 million civilians remained trapped on the surface. Imperial fleets had already surrounded the system. There was only one small defensive squadron standing between those civilians and occupation. Captain Torres commanded that squadron. When intelligence reports arrived detailing the size of the approaching Vorthan fleet, silence filled the command center. The enemy outnumbered them nearly 20-1. One officer finally spoke. "Captain, should we prepare surrender protocols?" Elena looked around the room. She saw exhausted faces. Fear. Uncertainty. People waiting for permission to give up. Instead she smiled. Not because the situation was good. Because the answer was simple. No. The officer blinked. No. We're buying time. That's all? Elena nodded. That's enough. Within hours, every available ship moved into position. Engineers rerouted power systems. Pilots prepared for combat. Volunteers continued loading evacuation transports. Nobody expected victory. But victory was no longer the objective. Time was. Every hour meant thousands more civilians escaping. Every minute mattered. When the Vorthan fleet arrived, its commander expected a routine engagement. Instead, he encountered something extraordinary. Human ships attacked aggressively despite impossible odds. They struck supply vessels, disrupted formations, forced larger ships to maneuver. They turned asteroid fields into ambush zones, converted mining equipment into weapons, used every advantage available. Nothing about their tactics followed conventional doctrine. It was chaotic, unpredictable, infuriating, and effective. Hours stretched into days. Days stretched into a week. The evacuation continued. Millions escaped. Meanwhile, Captain Torres and her forces refused to retreat. At one point, her flagship suffered catastrophic damage. Entire sections lost power. Life support systems failed. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the vessel. An officer approached her. Captain, we can still withdraw. Elena looked at a tactical display showing evacuation numbers. Nearly complete. Not complete. Nearly. She shook her head. Not yet. The officer stared. You may not survive this. Elena answered quietly. I know. Then she returned her attention to the battle. Across the system, human crews fought with remarkable determination. Not because they hated the enemy. Not because they sought glory. Because somewhere behind them, families were escaping. Children were escaping. Entire futures were escaping. The Vorthans could not understand that motivation. Their empire rewarded power. Humans often sacrificed power to protect others. The concept felt irrational. Yet there it was. Visible on every battlefield. When the final evacuation transport departed Haven's Reach, Captain Torres finally issued the retreat order. What remained of her squadron escaped minutes before overwhelming Imperial reinforcements arrived. The colony was lost. But the people were not. 4 million civilians survived. Across human space the story spread rapidly. Not as propaganda. As inspiration. The defense of Haven's Reach became a symbol. Proof that courage could matter even in defeat. Proof that sacrifice had value. Proof that humanity still stood. King Varric was furious. He had captured another colony. Yet somehow the humans celebrated. Months passed. The war expanded. And gradually, something unexpected began happening. The Empire's victories became more expensive. Every conquered system demanded occupation forces. Every destroyed station required resources. Every advance stretched supply lines farther. Human resistance adapted constantly. New strategies emerged. New technologies appeared. Entire volunteer networks coordinated intelligence across dozens of worlds. The Vorthans possessed overwhelming strength. Humanity possessed flexibility. One was powerful. The other was dangerous. The turning point came in the Orion Expanse, a region containing several crucial hyperspace corridors. Control of the expanse would determine access to Earth's inner defenses. Both sides understood its importance. Both sides committed enormous forces. The Imperial fleet assigned to the operation numbered nearly 3,000 warships. Human defenders possessed less than half that number. By every calculation, defeat seemed inevitable. Admiral Marcus Hale disagreed. Unlike many military leaders, Hale had spent years studying history. Not just human history. Alien history. Patterns fascinated him. Empires often believed size guaranteed victory. History repeatedly proved otherwise. During a strategy meeting, one commander pointed at the tactical display. We're outnumbered. Hale nodded. Correct. We're outgunned. Also correct. We cannot win a direct engagement. The admiral smiled slightly. Then we'll avoid one. The room fell silent. Slowly Hale revealed his plan. It was audacious. Risky. Possibly insane. Human forces would deliberately abandon several defensive positions. Imperial commanders would interpret the withdrawals as weakness. They would advance aggressively. And in doing so, they would unknowingly enter a carefully prepared trap. For weeks, engineers transformed the expanse. Asteroids concealed sensor arrays. Mining stations became hidden weapons platforms. Navigation beacons transmitted false information. Entire regions of space were redesigned to deceive the enemy. When the Imperial offensive began, everything unfolded exactly as expected. Vorthan fleets surged forward. Human forces retreated. Reports reached King Varric. At last it seemed humanity was breaking. The king personally ordered an accelerated advance. Finish the war. Crush resistance. Take Earth. Then came the trap. Without warning, hidden systems activated throughout the expanse. Communication networks collapsed. Sensor readings became unreliable. Navigation routes vanished. Massive asteroid fields shifted unexpectedly. Human attack groups emerged from dozens of concealed positions. Imperial formations fragmented. Confusion spread rapidly. Ships collided. Commands failed to reach frontline units. For the first time in generations, a major Vorthan fleet lost battlefield control. Admiral Hale seized the opportunity immediately. Human forces struck supply vessels first. Then communications hubs. Then command ships. Every attack focused on creating additional confusion. The objective was not destruction. It was paralysis. The strategy worked beyond expectations. Within hours, Imperial coordination disintegrated. Individual captains fought bravely. But bravery could not compensate for chaos. The mighty invasion fleet became thousands of isolated vessels struggling to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, human forces operated with astonishing precision. Years of preparation suddenly revealed themselves. Every movement had purpose. Every sacrifice created opportunity. Every setback became advantage. Watching from his flagship, the Vorthan fleet commander realized a terrible truth. This battle had been lost before it began. Not because humanity possessed superior weapons. Because humanity had anticipated every decision he would make. The realization arrived too late. By the battle's end, the Empire suffered its first major defeat in centuries. Hundreds of warships were destroyed. Thousands more retreated. Entire sectors erupted with shock. The impossible had happened. The Vorthan Empire had lost. Not a border skirmish. Not a minor engagement. A genuine strategic defeat. For the first time since the war began, celebrations erupted across human worlds. Hope returned. People who had spent months fearing extinction suddenly believed victory might be possible. Meanwhile, on Kalar Prime, King Varric stood alone in silence. Reports covered the chamber floor. Losses. Casualties. Retreats. Failures. The king stared at a holographic image of the battlefield. He had expected frightened primitives. Instead, he had encountered something else entirely. A civilization that refused to surrender. A species capable of turning weakness into strength. An enemy that fought not because victory was guaranteed, but because giving up was unthinkable. And deep inside, for the first time since the war began, King Varric felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. The war was no longer proceeding according to imperial expectations. Humanity had survived. Humanity had adapted. And now, humanity had proven it could win. The news traveled faster than any fleet. Faster than any official announcement. Faster than any attempt at censorship. The Vorthan Empire had lost. Not completely. Not yet. But the illusion of invincibility had been shattered. Across thousands of worlds, people stared at reports from the Orion expanse and struggled to believe what they were reading. For centuries, the Empire had seemed unstoppable. Its victories had become so common that many species assumed they were inevitable. Children grew up believing the Vorthans could not be defeated. Entire civilizations structured their foreign policies around that assumption. Now that assumption was gone. And once an idea dies, it rarely returns. On distant colony worlds, whispers began spreading. In crowded marketplaces, citizens exchanged rumors. Inside government chambers, leaders asked dangerous questions. If humans could resist, could others? If humanity could win battles, could the Empire actually lose the war? Questions like those frightened the imperial government more than any weapon. Because fleets could destroy cities. Questions could destroy empires. On Kalar Prime, King Varric understood the danger immediately. The defeat itself was painful. The consequences were worse. For generations, the Empire had maintained power through more than military force. It relied on belief. Subjects believed resistance was hopeless. Governors believed loyalty was rewarded. Enemies believed defeat was certain. That belief formed the foundation of imperial authority. Now humanity was attacking the foundation itself. The king summoned his advisors. The meeting lasted deep into the night. Military leaders demanded larger offensives. Politicians demanded stricter control. Intelligence agencies demanded expanded surveillance. Everyone offered solutions. None addressed the real problem. The Empire was fighting humanity. Humanity was changing the galaxy. Those were not the same thing. Meanwhile, on Earth, a different conversation was taking place. Human leaders gathered in a secure command center beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Representatives from dozens of nations studied the latest intelligence reports. The mood remained cautious. The victory at Orion had been significant, but nobody mistook it for final success. The Empire still possessed overwhelming resources. Its fleets remained vast. Its armies remained powerful. One battle could not end the war. Yet something had changed. Humanity was no longer fighting merely to survive. For the first time, it was shaping the conflict. General Nathan Cole stood before a holographic projection of known Imperial territory. "Look closely," he said. The image shifted. Supply routes appeared. Fleet deployments. Economic networks. Political centers. Then another layer emerged. Unrest. Protests. Local resistance movements. Declining production numbers. Growing instability. The room became silent. The pattern was obvious. The Empire was stretching itself thin. Every conquered world required attention. Every rebellion consumed resources. Every military setback created additional pressure. Humanity had not caused all those problems. Many had existed for decades. The war simply exposed them. General Cole pointed toward the Imperial frontier. They built their empire on fear. He paused. And fear only works until someone stops being afraid. Far beyond human territory, on a world called Taris V, that lesson was already unfolding. Taris V had belonged to the Empire for nearly 400 years. Its people obeyed Imperial laws, paid Imperial taxes, served in Imperial industries. Outwardly, everything appeared stable. Beneath the surface, resentment simmered. The inhabitants remembered stories passed down through generations. Stories about freedom. Stories about independence. Stories about a time before Imperial occupation. Most considered those stories impossible dreams. Then humanity arrived. Not physically. Through news. Through broadcasts. Through example. The people of Taris V watched humans stand against impossible odds. They watched colonies refuse surrender. They watched ordinary civilians endure hardship without giving up. And gradually something awakened. Hope. Not certainty. Hope. The difference mattered. Hope could survive where certainty could not. Within months, demonstrations appeared across the planet. Then strikes. Then organized resistance. Imperial authorities responded harshly. Arrests increased. Restrictions expanded. Military patrols intensified. Yet the unrest continued growing. Because fear was losing its grip. The phenomenon repeated across dozens of worlds. Then hundreds. Every Imperial victory against humanity seemed to inspire more resistance elsewhere. Every attempt to crush dissent created additional dissent. The Empire was winning battles. Yet somehow it kept becoming weaker. King Varric noticed the trend. Unfortunately, so did everyone else. The king's frustration gradually transformed into obsession. He studied human history personally. Read human literature. Reviewed military records. Examined psychological profiles. Night after night, he searched for an explanation. What made humans different? Why did they refuse surrender when logic demanded it? Why did setbacks strengthen them? Why did losses inspire them? The answers frustrated him. Because many seemed contradictory. Humans were compassionate, yet capable of incredible ferocity. They argued constantly, yet united when threatened. They feared death, yet willingly sacrificed themselves. Nothing about the species fit neatly into Imperial models. The more Varric studied humanity, the less he understood it. And the less he understood it, the more dangerous it appeared. The next major turning point came unexpectedly. Not through a fleet. Not through a battle. Through a rescue mission. A massive stellar storm erupted near the border regions. Entire systems lost communication. Trade routes collapsed. Civilian vessels became trapped. Among those endangered were thousands of Imperial citizens. Transport crews. Merchants. Families. The storm showed no concern for political boundaries. It threatened everyone equally. Imperial authorities immediately dispatched rescue forces. Unfortunately, many vessels arrived too late. Conditions deteriorated rapidly. Ships disappeared. Colonies lost power. Casualty projections climbed into the millions. Then something astonishing happened. Human rescue fleets entered the disaster zone. At first, Imperial commanders assumed they were military reinforcements. Instead, the humans began evacuating civilians. All civilians. Human. Neutral. Imperial. It did not matter. If someone needed help, the rescue teams responded. Again and again, human crews entered dangerous regions despite enormous risks. They pulled stranded passengers from failing vessels, delivered emergency supplies, repaired damaged infrastructure. Some never returned. Many died saving complete strangers. The story spread rapidly throughout the galaxy. Imperial citizens watched recordings in disbelief. One particular transmission became famous. A Vorthan child sat inside a damaged transport moments before life support failed. The vessel had lost all power. Rescue was considered impossible. Then a human ship arrived. A firefighter named Sarah Morgan personally carried the child to safety. When reporters later asked why she had risked her life for an enemy citizen, her answer was simple. Because she needed help. Nothing more. No speech. No politics. No conditions. Just humanity. The interview reached billions, including King Varric. The king replayed the recording multiple times. He expected propaganda. Instead, he found sincerity. The human genuinely meant it. She had risked everything for someone she had never met. Someone from an enemy empire. Someone whose government actively sought humanity's destruction. The action made no strategic sense. Yet somehow it carried enormous power. Across Imperial space, citizens began comparing human behavior with Imperial behavior. The comparison was uncomfortable. The Empire inspired obedience. Humanity inspired admiration. One relied on fear. The other relied on example. And examples are remarkably difficult to defeat. Months later, reports reached Kaler Prime describing a troubling trend. Imperial soldiers stationed near the front lines increasingly respected human opponents. Some openly questioned the war. Others refused certain orders. A few even defected. Not because humanity bribed them. Because exposure changed them. They witnessed human courage. Human compassion. Human resilience. And once they witnessed those qualities firsthand, Imperial propaganda became harder to believe. King Varric dismissed several advisors for reporting such information. The reports continued arriving anyway. Reality rarely cares whether leaders approve of it. As the second year of the war approached, the Empire still controlled enormous territory. Its fleets remained formidable. Its armies remained vast. Yet beneath the surface, invisible fractures continued spreading. The cracks appeared small. Individually insignificant. Together they threatened everything. Humanity had discovered a truth the Empire never fully understood. The strongest structures do not collapse because of one massive blow. They collapse because countless tiny fractures eventually connect. And throughout the galaxy those fractures were growing. The Empire still appeared mighty. The king still sat upon his throne. The war still raged among the stars. But for the first time in centuries, people everywhere began imagining a future beyond Vorthan rule. And once a population begins imagining freedom, no empire remains secure for long. By the beginning of the war's third year, the galaxy had changed. Not visibly. Not all at once. But in thousands of subtle ways. Conversations that once happened only in secret were now spoken openly. Governors questioned imperial directives. Military officers challenged strategic decisions. Entire populations began imagining something they had not imagined in centuries. A future without the Vorthan Empire. For generations, such thoughts had been considered fantasy. The Empire was too large, too powerful, too established. No single species could challenge it. Humanity agreed. That was why humanity never tried to do it alone. The realization emerged gradually. At first, Earth's leaders focused only on survival. Then they focused on resistance. Eventually they recognized a larger truth. The Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. It ruled countless worlds. But many of those worlds did not want to be ruled. The challenge was not defeating the Empire. The challenge was helping the galaxy remember that it had choices. And so humanity began reaching outward. Not with threats. Not with demands. With partnerships. Trade agreements expanded. Scientific cooperation increased. Human diplomats traveled farther than ever before. Everywhere they went, they carried the same message. We do not ask you to fight for us. We ask you to decide your own future. The message resonated. Because for centuries, few had offered such a choice. Many species expected humanity to seek dominance if it won the war. Instead, humans spoke about freedom, self-determination, mutual defense. Concepts that sounded almost revolutionary after generations of imperial control. One by one, governments began responding. Some offered resources. Others shared intelligence. A few openly supported Earth. Most remained cautious. But even caution represented progress. The Empire noticed. King Varric noticed. And the king was furious. "What are they offering?" he demanded during a military briefing. One advisor answered carefully. "Hope, your majesty." The king slammed a fist against the table. "Hope is not a weapon." The advisor lowered his eyes. "No, sire." But privately, everyone in the room understood something important. Hope could become far more dangerous than a weapon. Weapons destroy ships. Hope changes minds. And minds were changing everywhere. The first major ally to openly join humanity was the Kelleran Union. The Kellerans were not warriors. They possessed no legendary fleets. No powerful armies. No military tradition. What they possessed was courage. Their government announced its support during a live broadcast viewed across hundreds of systems. The declaration lasted less than 5 minutes. Its impact echoed throughout the galaxy. For the first time, a sovereign power openly rejected imperial authority and survived. Others soon followed. Then more. A coalition began forming. Small at first. Then larger. Then impossible to ignore. The Alliance of Free Worlds was born. King Varric publicly dismissed the development. Privately, he ordered emergency strategic reviews. Because for the first time humanity was no longer standing alone. And every new ally represented something the Empire could not easily replace. Just, people were choosing humanity. Not because humans were stronger. Because humans inspired them. The distinction terrified imperial leadership. Meanwhile, along the war's shifting front lines, another story was unfolding. A story that would become legend. A story that would forever change how the galaxy viewed humanity. It began in the Helios Corridor. The corridor connected dozens of critical systems. Control of the region would determine future offensives. Both sides understood its importance. Both sides committed enormous resources. What nobody anticipated was the disaster waiting within. Deep inside the corridor existed an unstable stellar cluster. Ancient surveys had classified it as dangerous but manageable. Those surveys were wrong. Without warning, the cluster destabilized. Massive gravitational disturbances erupted throughout the region. Navigation systems failed. Hyperspace routes collapsed. Entire fleets became trapped. Unfortunately, one of those trapped fleets belonged to the newly formed alliance. More than 600 ships found themselves stranded. Among them were evacuation vessels carrying millions of civilians. The situation worsened by the hour. Scientists estimated the corridor would become completely impassable within days. Anyone remaining inside would die. Imperial commanders quickly recognized the opportunity. They launched an offensive. Destroy the trapped fleet. Break the alliance. And the threat? Simple. At least on paper. Reality proved different. Human reconnaissance teams discovered the Imperial advance first. The news reached Alliance command almost immediately. The trapped civilians could not escape. The Imperial fleet could not be stopped conventionally. There was only one possible solution. A desperate one. Perhaps impossible. Perhaps suicidal. The kind of solution humanity had become famous for. At the center of the crisis stood Admiral Marcus Hale. The same strategist responsible for the victory at Orion. After reviewing every available option, he reached a grim conclusion. Someone would have to remain behind. Someone would need to hold the corridor. Not for hours. For days. Long enough for millions to escape. Long enough for rescue routes to stabilize. Long enough for hope to survive. The task force assigned to the mission became known as Guardian Fleet. Volunteers flooded recruitment channels. More ships offered assistance than command could accept. Nobody wanted the assignment. Yet everyone wanted the responsibility. The contradiction was profoundly human. When Admiral Hale addressed the fleet before departure, his speech was remarkably brief. "The people behind us are counting on time." He paused. "We're going to give it to them. Nothing more. Nothing needed." The fleet understood. The battle began 2 days later. And from the very first moment, it became clear that Guardian Fleet faced impossible odds. Imperial warships outnumbered them nearly 4-1. Heavy carriers filled space from horizon to horizon. Battleships advanced in disciplined formations. Missile screens illuminated the darkness like storms of artificial stars. Against such power, survival seemed unlikely. Retreat seemed impossible. Yet Guardian Fleet advanced anyway. The first engagements were brutal. Human vessels absorbed punishment that should have destroyed them. Damaged ships continued fighting. Crippled crews refused evacuation. Entire formations sacrificed advantageous positions to protect civilian corridors. Hour after hour they held. Then another hour. Then another. Imperial commanders grew increasingly frustrated. Every calculation predicted collapse. Every forecast predicted victory. Yet the humans continued resisting. Not effectively. Not efficiently. Relentlessly. The difference mattered. On the third day, the flagship Resolute suffered catastrophic damage. Multiple decks were destroyed. Primary weapons failed. Life support systems became unstable. Emergency evacuation procedures activated automatically. Admiral Hale canceled them. An officer stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, the ship won't survive much longer." Hale nodded. "I know. We need to leave." The admiral looked toward a tactical display. Civilian evacuation progress, 82%. Not enough. He shook his head. Not yet. The battle continued. By the fourth day, nearly every ship in Guardian Fleet carried severe damage. Ammunition reserves dwindled. Medical facilities overflowed. Exhaustion spread throughout the ranks. Still they fought. Because behind them millions continued escaping. Children. Families. Entire civilizations. Every minute purchased another chance. Every sacrifice protected another future. And eventually the impossible happened. The evacuation succeeded. Rescue routes stabilized. The trapped civilians escaped. Millions survived. The mission was accomplished. But the cost was devastating. Nearly half of Guardian Fleet never returned. Hundreds of ships vanished among the stars. Thousands of names entered history. Among them was Admiral Marcus Hale. His final transmission became famous throughout the galaxy. The message was recorded moments before the Resolute disappeared. There was no fear in his voice. No regret. Only calm certainty. "Tell them we bought enough time." Then the transmission ended. Across Alliance space people mourned. Across Imperial space people listened. And for many Vorthans something changed forever. They had spent years hearing humans described as primitive, weak, inferior. Yet they had just witnessed an entire fleet willingly sacrifice itself for strangers. Not soldiers. Not leaders. Civilians. People they would never meet. The act challenged everything Imperial culture believed about strength. Because true strength was not domination. True strength was choosing sacrifice when selfishness would be easier. The story spread rapidly. Far faster than Imperial censorship could contain. Even within the royal palace, officials whispered about Guardian Fleet. Some spoke with admiration. Others with confusion. A few with envy. Because deep down they recognized something uncomfortable. The humans possessed a kind of power the Empire lacked. The power to inspire. The power to unite. The power to make others willingly stand beside them. And that realization finally reached King Varric. Late one evening, the king stood alone on a balcony overlooking the endless lights of Kalar Prime. For years he had viewed humanity as a temporary obstacle. Then a military threat. Then a dangerous enemy. Now he faced a possibility he had never considered. Humanity might become something greater. A symbol. And symbols could survive defeats. Symbols could survive wars. Symbols could outlive empires. For the first time, Varric found himself staring into the darkness beyond his capital world and asking a question he never imagined asking. Not whether humanity could win, but whether the Empire could survive. Far away beyond countless stars, the alliance of free worlds continued growing. New members arrived every month. New fleets assembled. New dreams emerged. The galaxy was changing. And the momentum no longer belonged to the Empire. It belonged to those who believed freedom was worth fighting for. It belonged to those willing to sacrifice for one another. It belonged to humanity. And somewhere deep inside the heart of the Vorthan Empire, the fear had finally changed sides. The fourth year of the war began in silence. Not the silence of peace. The silence that comes before a storm. Across the galaxy, fleets moved. Shipyards worked without rest. Governments made decisions that would shape history. Everyone understood the truth. The conflict had reached its final stage. One side would emerge transformed. The other might not survive at all. The Vorthan Empire still possessed enormous military power. Its territory remained vast. Its industrial capacity dwarfed most civilizations. On paper, it remained the strongest force in known space. But wars are not fought on paper. They are fought by people. And the Empire was running out of those willing to believe in it. Entire sectors had become unstable. Several occupied worlds openly rebelled. Others quietly refused imperial directives. Production quotas fell. Supply chains fractured. Communication networks became unreliable. Every problem created another problem. Every attempt to restore order consumed additional resources. The empire was not collapsing from external attack. It was collapsing from internal exhaustion. Humanity had not broken it. Humanity had simply revealed the cracks. Meanwhile, the alliance of free worlds continued growing stronger. Species that once feared each other now cooperated. Scientists shared knowledge. Industries coordinated production. Military leaders exchanged strategies. The alliance was imperfect. Arguments remained common. Disagreements occurred daily. Humans themselves still debated everything. Yet somehow the coalition continued functioning. King Varric could not understand it. His empire relied on obedience. The alliance relied on choice. And despite all logic, choice seemed stronger. The final campaign began when Alliance intelligence identified a critical weakness. For centuries, the Empire had centered its authority around a handful of core worlds. Political power, economic coordination, military logistics. Everything flowed through those systems. Destroying them was unnecessary. Isolating them would be enough. General Nathan Cole presented the strategy before Alliance leadership. A massive holographic map illuminated the chamber. Colored routes stretched across hundreds of systems. Supply corridors, communication relays, transportation networks, the Empire's lifelines. Cole pointed toward them. We don't need to conquer their territory. He paused. We only need to disconnect it. The room became silent. Everyone understood. The goal was not revenge. The goal was not domination. The goal was freedom. For everyone, including those trapped inside the Empire itself. The offensive launched 3 weeks later. History would remember it as the Liberation Campaign. Across dozens of sectors, Alliance fleets moved simultaneously. Communication hubs were disabled. Strategic relays captured. Supply networks interrupted. Occupation forces isolated. Imperial commanders attempted to respond. Unfortunately, they no longer possessed the coordination necessary to manage a crisis of such scale. Years of war had stretched resources beyond sustainable limits. Every decision arrived too slowly. Every response came too late. Entire regions slipped beyond Imperial control. Then another. Then another. Worlds that had endured centuries of occupation suddenly found themselves free. Some celebrated openly. Others simply lowered Imperial banners and raised their own. No grand declarations. No dramatic ceremonies. Just ordinary people reclaiming ordinary lives. That was what the war had always been about. Not conquest. Choice. The Empire struggled desperately to halt the momentum. Yet every effort seemed to accelerate its decline. Troops surrendered rather than fight. Governors negotiated peaceful transitions. Even some military commanders began cooperating with Alliance forces to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. The change shocked everyone, including humanity. Because despite everything that had happened, humans continued offering mercy. Imperial soldiers who surrendered received medical treatment. Civilian populations received aid. Former enemies received protection. Again and again, humanity chose reconciliation over revenge. Many Alliance leaders initially questioned the policy. General Cole never did. Because he understood something important. The objective was not to defeat an empire. The objective was to build something better afterward. Eventually, the inevitable occurred. The outer sectors fell. Then the middle sectors. Finally, the campaign reached the Imperial core. The heart of Vorthan power. The region no enemy fleet had entered for nearly 3,000 years. At the center stood Kalar Prime. The throne world. The symbol of Imperial authority. The home of King Varric. Across the galaxy, billions watched events unfold. Not through military reports. Through live broadcasts. History was happening in real time. And everyone knew it. Inside the royal palace, advisors pleaded with the king. Some recommended evacuation. Others suggested negotiations. A few proposed surrender. The word echoed through the chamber like blasphemy. Surrender. For centuries, the Empire demanded surrender from others. Now the concept had reached its own doorstep. King Varric listened quietly. For a long time he said nothing. Age seemed to weigh heavily upon him. The confidence that once defined his presence had faded. Not completely, but enough. When the advisors finally finished speaking, the king rose from his throne. Slowly, deliberately, and for the first time in years he spoke without anger. Leave us. The chamber emptied. Minutes later, Varric stood alone before a massive window overlooking his capital. Millions of lights stretched across the horizon. Towering cities. Ancient monuments. Generations of history. Everything he had spent a lifetime protecting. Everything now slipping away. The king activated a secure communication channel. To the surprise of everyone involved, the recipient was Earth. Specifically General Nathan Cole. When the connection opened, neither man spoke immediately. For a moment they simply observed each other. Two leaders. Two enemies. Two symbols of opposing futures. Finally Varric broke the silence. When this war began, I believed humanity was weak. Cole said nothing. The king continued. I thought strength came from power. His gaze shifted toward the city beyond the window. Power was all I ever understood. For several seconds silence returned. Then Varric asked a question. A genuine question. Tell me something human. Cole waited. Why do your people keep fighting? The answer arrived without hesitation. Because some things matter more than winning. The king studied him carefully. Freedom? Freedom. Family? Family. Hope. Cole nodded. Hope. Varric looked away. For years he had searched for humanity's secret. Some superior strategy. Some hidden technology. Some advantage he had overlooked. Now he finally understood. The secret was not a weapon. It was belief. Humans believed ordinary lives possessed value. Humans believed individuals mattered. Humans believed sacrifice meant something. And those beliefs created resilience no empire could conquer. The realization arrived too late to save his throne. But not too late to save lives. Hours later, a transmission echoed across the Imperial core. Every military channel carried the same message. Every ship received identical orders. Every soldier heard the king's voice. This war is over. Shock spread instantly. Varric continued. Stand down. No speeches. No excuses. No attempts to rewrite history. Just acceptance. The empire obeyed. Because despite everything, the king still commanded loyalty. And because many were exhausted. The fighting ended. Not everywhere immediately. But enough. The bloodshed stopped. The war was finished. When Alliance fleets entered orbit above Kalar Prime, they encountered no resistance. No final battle. No desperate last stand. Only silence. The kind of silence that follows a long storm. Days later, representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered on the former throne world. Not to celebrate victory. To establish peace. The event became one of the most significant moments in galactic history. Among the attendees stood humans. Former Imperial citizens. Independent governments. New allies. Old enemies. For the first time in centuries they met as equals. King Varric attended as well. Not as a ruler. As a witness. History had transformed around him. His empire was gone. The banners lowered. The fleets dispersed. The throne abandoned. Everything he once considered permanent had vanished. Yet strangely he felt no rage. Only understanding. Late that evening he walked alone through a public memorial dedicated to those lost during the war. Names covered enormous stone walls. Humans. Forthans. Countless others. Friends and enemies together. The king stopped before one particular inscription. Admiral Marcus Hale. Tell them we bought enough time. Varric stared at the words for a long moment. Then he finally understood the difference between his empire and humanity. The empire asked people to die for power. Humanity asked people to live for each other. That difference had decided the war. Years later, historians would debate military strategies, economic factors, political decisions. All of those mattered. But beneath every analysis existed a simpler truth. The Vorthan Empire underestimated humanity. It mistook compassion for weakness, unity for fragility, hope for naivety. And when the empire finally recognized its mistake, it was already too late. The galaxy changed forever after the war. Independent worlds flourished. Former enemies became partners. New discoveries connected civilizations that once lived in fear. The future remained uncertain. Challenges remained. Conflict still occurred. Humanity never claimed perfection. It never needed to. Because perfection was not humanity's greatest strength. Its greatest strength was the ability to keep moving forward. To keep helping. To keep hoping. Even when the odds seemed impossible. Especially when the odds seemed impossible. And on countless worlds, people told stories about the species that stood against the most powerful empire in history. Not because humans were stronger. Not because humans were smarter. Because humans refused to surrender what mattered most. Their resolve. The very thing King Varric had mocked. the very thing that ultimately brought down his empire. And for the first time the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. If this story moved you, subscribe for more human stories from the stars.